Good evening and welcome to Transcontinental Times on Smart Entrepreneurship Decoded. We have met a multitude of entrepreneurs, investors, venture capitalists, people from all walks of life connected with the business ecosystem across the world. One common theme that we keep hearing over the last few years is digitization and the impact it has on all our lives. It is so hectic out there in the world. Or are we living in the cusp of them? For an older generation used to manufacturing, the rise of the service industry was difficult enough and automation was tough. But digitization is challenging CEOs like never before. Not just established ones, but even owners of small businesses, SMEs, and even startups. Everybody needs to start thinking how they will work, operate, and flourish in the digital world. I was trying to look out for a guest who will help demystify all of this for us. Somebody who's worked on a global landscape, somebody who understands innovation, digital, and especially how human minds work in a workplace. I'm delighted to welcome Laurence Smith, who's a co-author of a global bestseller, Transformation Mindset: 10 Things Leaders Should Be Doing Today to Turn Crisis into Opportunity. But more importantly, he's about to come out with his new book, Future Eager, a digital mindset playbook for leaders to transform organizations and accelerate sustainability. He has worked in virtually every large company you can think of at leadership roles and led transformation efforts. So nobody better than him to help us demystify innovation and digital mindset. Laurence, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for that incredible introduction. It's certainly been a journey.
So, Laurence, you've been in HR. You've headed HR in some of the largest companies in Singapore and other parts of the world. What is it about a digital mindset that is challenging people? We hear about entrepreneurial mindset, we hear about growth mindset, but what is different about a digital mindset?
Yeah. To be honest, there's a lot of similarities between entrepreneurial growth and digital mindset. In some ways, you could argue digital mindset is just growth mindset applied to the digital world. And it's really about how do you get people, and this is the new book you just mentioned, Future Eager. How do you get people curious, eager, exploring about what's coming next? So for me, I actually define digital mindset as having three major components. And if you look at it as your leadership team in the organization, to what extent do they, one, understand the business models of the big tech players, the digital natives, the platform players, and the big disruptors in your industry, be that fintech or health tech or insurtech? So how well do your leaders understand the business models of the digital natives? Second, how well do they understand and can they have an intelligent conversation about the exponential technologies that are changing the world, from AI and augmented reality to extended reality, virtual reality, and all of those tools and technologies are changing so incredibly fast. Third, the enabling tools and frameworks that the startup companies and the digital natives use as their ways of working. So agile, design thinking, lean startup, and all of that. So those are, to me, the three critical elements of digital mindset: the business models, the technology, the tools. But underlying that is the leadership culture, and most importantly, the psychological safety to allow people and support people in taking the risks to try these new ideas and experiment with all things digital.
It's interesting you say that. A lot of us assume that the younger generation, people in their 20s, 30s, who have been born with a mobile phone and other digital gadgets and appliances, we assume they're more digitally agile. But digital is much more than using social media and a phone, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. And in fact, there's some great examples around the world where older people have actually proven to be either just as agile and adept in taking on new technologies, or customers have preferred to work with older workers using the new technologies. I can think of two examples off the top of my head. One is the Japan Post Office, where they try to automate all of the post offices, the branches, only to realize that most of their customers have their pensions in the post office savings bank, and actually want to deal with older people. So they had to rehire a lot of people they'd let go and reskill them as meters, greeters, explainers, and guides or coaches in the digital world to use the new digital technologies. Actually, DBS Bank in Singapore, where I used to be head of learning and talent, we had a very similar experience when we first implemented video ATMs. The assumption was the younger generation would be best at it, and they were. But interestingly, customers often prefer to talk to an older person with more experience and perhaps a more congenial manner, but was equally comfortable with the technology. So I think there's an assumption there that we can often challenge, especially if we're smart, about reskilling and offering people the opportunities.
So when the younger people get into startup mode, and that's a big movement globally, but more so in countries like India, China, Indonesia, ASEAN in general, you are finding these innovation hubs come up, which are very interesting. Singapore kind of is not as innovative, but London rebranded itself and became an innovation hub. Then you have smaller countries like Estonia, Latvia, etc., becoming innovation hubs. So what is it that these guys are getting right, that they become innovation hubs? Is it just getting people together, or what's really happening here?
So you ask a really interesting question and provide a few provocative examples. I mean, Estonia obviously put the entire government and all the national services online, gosh, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And I actually signed up as an e-Estonia citizen, just out of curiosity to learn about it and to see what it was like. And, the fact that anybody in the world could become a digital citizen of Estonia, start a company, open a bank account almost instantly, very cheaply, online, with a very low income tax rate was really interesting. London likewise has recently rebranded itself, and obviously after Brexit, is pushing really hard into the crypto, blockchain, Web3, and metaverse space. So I think it takes a degree of leadership and daring, to be honest. Some investment and some infrastructure, but at the end of the day, if you're not attractive to the young talent, the digital nomads, those that are digitally mobile and that can now work anywhere, as we've learned over the last couple of years, it's not really going to be effective. So I think it's a combination of some daring, some infrastructure, some investment, and then just being very attractive to the best talent globally is mobile these days.
It is interesting you mentioned Estonia, and you gave a bit of an example of you can start a company instantly and you can get going instantly. That's what Singapore used to be famous for. But Singapore is not exactly known for innovation at this point of time.
So I think Singapore is a really interesting example because the government obviously has invested massively over the last few years. There's A-Star, which is a large government initiative with a lot of the universities and top PhDs, and we at DBS Bank partnered with them, and there's a lot of really good innovation that came out of that as well. And likewise, there's some interesting, obviously, the industries I know best are generally fintech and insurtech. There's lots of interesting companies that come out of there, but looking back at many of the times, I was a judge on various hackathons or competitions. including the Singapore Government Skills Future hackathon, far too many of the teams were focused on Singapore when they should have been, I mean, it's a tiny market, for goodness sake, where they should have been focused at least on ASEAN, if not Asia, if not global. And often just the scope of ambition or the confidence to go global was not there. That was the second aspect. I think the third aspect was, there was a lot of what we called at the time, lifestyle entrepreneurs of, often from, somewhat wealthy families that would have a startup, which was really, for them to say they had a startup, rather than necessarily having a real plan. But I must, say a couple of other points, because I do think a few things the Singapore government has got right over the last few years has been, I think the MAS, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, has been very innovative and progressive in promoting, a sandbox for fintechs to experiment in, for allowing and indeed promoting movement to the cloud of big banks and insurance far earlier than most other countries. And again, the Institute of Banking and Finance some years ago, and I was partly involved in this, launched their Future Enabled Skills Program, and identified, actually 6 areas of critical future skills that the entire financial services industry needed to know. So I do think there's a lot of innovation in Singapore, but I think perhaps a lot of it is Singapore focused, and making them more innovative internally, rather than perhaps being as externally focused as we might like or wish for.
I love the term lifestyle entrepreneur. I meet a lot of them. It always amazes me that they go from idea to
everywhere
idea
in the world, everywhere
without actually executing anything.
Yes. But it's a really compelling story when you're meeting friends with a networking event.
So, Lawrence, I know you work a lot in Indonesia. In fact, you're in Jakarta right now, just like me.
Indeed.
Now, the culture here is quite different, right? People tend to be more content, and there is a whole world of mining and energy, and people can live off the land kind of concept. Though it's not true anymore, but still there's a perception. How do you spark innovation in a unwilling population, so to speak, or where an R&D culture does not exist?
So it's interesting, actually. Somebody else asked me a very similar question, and I just wrote a bit of an article on this, literally this morning, in fact. And a couple of points. I think Indonesians generally are quite happy and often more content with their life than other parts of Southeast Asia that I've observed and lived in. So I think there's less burning, compelling drive necessary to be hyper successful, to be really rich, to be an entrepreneur, to make a lot of money. I do see, however, still quite a lot of innovation going on. There's some really interesting startups I've been meeting with in the last few weeks. Again, especially in the blockchain, the metaverse, Web3, NFT space, and a lot of innovation in Bali in there as well. But when I was asked, what are the differences in Indonesia between the rest of the world in terms of digital mindset and transformation, there's not massive differences, but a few of them were, I noticed, the CEOs, and again, this is generally, big banks, insurance companies, and telcos I'm working with, may have a big vision statement about digital transformation. They don't necessarily have a really clear definition of what success looks like when they want to be the best bank, the best insurance company, the best telco in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. That's one. So, big ambition, but not necessarily clarity on what it will feel like when you get there, or even how to get there. So, not much of a roadmap. Second, it's often not in the CEO scorecard and cascaded down as much as it needs to be. Third, where they do, for example, leadership workshops on digital mindset, hire McKinsey, Bain, BCG to do your strategy, hire INSEAD or IMD to do workshops for the top 200. and then wonder why the rest of the company hasn't really changed. So there's typically not the sort of broad scale experiential learning, action learning, cascading to everybody else. So those are a few of the things that I've seen that I feel are different in Indonesia versus some of the other countries where I've been doing work like this.
So your organization works a lot with large companies and CEOs and leadership teams to help them through their digital transformation journey. Uh, what are the top 2 or 3 things or mental blocks leaders need to really overcome? Because generally they are older, right? And they feel disadvantaged and a bit threatened. What is it they need to
Yes.
overcome to really embrace the digital world?
Yep. And I love the last 3 words you just mentioned, or 4 words: embrace the digital world. That was actually literally the exact wording we used at DBS when we were doing this digital mindsets initiative, which was embrace the digital world. And it really starts at the top of the house, ideally with the board, and to what extent are there people on the board that are really savvy about digital, have digital mindset, those 3 things I mentioned earlier. And has the CEO worked to build that within his or her own leadership team so that they're seeing digital as an opportunity, they're confident about it, they can ask the right questions when McKinsey, Bain, or BCG come to do a strategy presentation to them. And they're not just sitting there and almost passively accepting what the consultants are telling them. So the first challenge is, how do you get that digital mindset, digital literacy at the top of the house? That really is the biggest first challenge. Once you've done that, it's then how do you get a critical mass of sort of 1 downs and 2 downs? The top, the terminology I used to use at DBS was the top 20, the next 200, 2,000 and 20,000. So how do you get the next 200 or the top 1% of the bank below the leadership team to really build their own digital mindset, to start leading by example, role modeling, giving the psychological safety? One of the things we did at DBS Bank years ago, and we've sort of worked out how to do completely virtually more recently, and now going back to face, is we put bankers and startups in a room together for 72 hours. Locked the door, metaphorically speaking, and gave them a real business problem to solve, but in combined teams of bankers and startups, and had them do lean startup agile development, actually create prototypes and walk the streets with the prototypes and show customers and get real feedback. So they behaved like a startup, and 72 hours later you couldn't tell who were the bankers and who were the startups, and it was really transformational in sort of mindset and behaviors. Because once and this is the important thing, digital transformation is not another initiative. It's the new way of working. And once you have discovered for yourself, experienced for yourself, new and better ways of working and problem solving and making decisions and running effective meetings, you will not go back to the old way of doing it.
Yeah.
And you'll be highly engaged in how you get the rest of the team and your direct reports to think this way, act this way, behave this way as well. So those, I think, are the most important parts.
You're right. In many ways, digital transformation is not like the iterative, linear way we went step by step, right? From physical banking to ATMs to online. This is a leap. This is not baby steps. This is a leap. And that's why people struggle. But let me ask you something as an entrepreneur, because you left a corporate job and started out on your own as well. So you're an entrepreneur yourself. Now, when you get into this corporate training and digital transformation training and the other things that you do, in a world where WhatsApp and YouTube has any content you want virtually free, how do you build a practice? How do you differentiate?
Oh, good question. I mean, the good news is all of that content is out there and you can pull it in and use it. But, it comes down to, there's a massive difference between pushing content to people, or even people absorbing content themselves, and having and building stuff, making stuff, actually understanding for themselves through experiences or action learning or hackathons or prototyping, that they too can do this. Because it's great to watch a YouTube video of how somebody else did it. I hope it's great to read one of my articles, watch one of my videos on how we did it. But what really makes the difference is when people do it for themselves and they have that aha moment. So, two very quick examples, actually three. Again, the DBS hackathons, where we got bankers to behave like startups and become startups. Second, a year or two later, we took 200 managing directors at the DBS offsite, and in the morning, in pairs, we built 100 prototypes in the morning. We had the top 200 people in the bank build 100 prototypes in the morning. None of them knew they could do that. And by lunchtime, they were all so pleased with themselves because they'd actually built a prototype. They built an app. This was so cool. That was massive. More recently, and this has been completely virtual, we've been working with a top 20 global insurance company with cohorts of 50 people. And there's been some pre-work, there's been some Zoom sessions, but we've had them again, very quickly, building prototypes or building a dashboard in less than an hour in virtual groups. And then again, building prototypes, having almost a film festival at the end where everybody votes on each other's prototypes and demo videos and so on and so forth. So when people do it for themselves, they truly learn. When you tell them about it or send them a video, an article, you'll engage a little bit of interest. Yeah. But for me, it's truly...
So you demystify it and get them along by actually doing stuff.
Yes. It's all about the making, building, experimenting, failing, trying. Absolutely right.
Awesome. Now, you have been an HR guy for a long time. So you understand.
You can see all the white hair, right?
You can see no hair. I spent my life in HR. I fondly call it human remains department, but that's an injustice.
There you go.
But, with all this digitization, and I especially have sympathy for school children, where everybody's pumping stuff out to them, right? It's almost cruel. Study 8 hours in school, pay for it, and then come back home, and then you have all these edutech companies throwing stuff at you. But forget them. Let's just take digital in general. Where does compassion, empathy, etc., come into play? I mean, does human values take a backseat, or teamwork, collaboration? I mean, everything seems to take a backseat. Everything is very individualistic and targeted at the individual.
So I would actually dare to disagree with you.
Okay.
So I think generally and far too often you're right in that a lot of this is targeted at the individual or thought about individualistically. But I would argue where companies are doing this right, it's not about automating to reduce headcount. It's about digitizing to get closer to customers and develop better solutions. And I think if you do that right, you take a lot of crap out of people's lives. A lot of the bureaucracy, the paperwork, the time wasting, the stupid meetings. And you actually give them a lot more time to interact with customers, to collaborate with their peers, to actually be more reflective on the work that they're doing, because they're no longer spending time doing stuff that basically machines can now do better. So I think that's one aspect. I think the other aspect that's really important and missed in far too many of our HR programs or leadership development programs is exactly what you're getting at, which is how do you, get people more curious about learning about AI and teaching machines to learn and creating dashboards and bots or whatever, just for fun to learn how to do it, but also work together more effectively as human beings. And we failed terribly at a big financial services company where we're trying to get reverse mentoring to happen, and it was a complete failure. And then we turned around and said, okay, just one thing. Just share one thing with your boss. One thing that you've learned, one thing that's really cool, one thing you should think they should know about, one thing they should go home and try with their kids, or one thing you need their help on. Just one thing. And that worked. And that was transformational. And it took it from being, oh my God, I've got to set up a 30-minute meeting with my boss and be a reverse mentor, to anytime you're catching up in the weekly meeting or having a coffee, just share one thing. And taking it from a to-do to a very human conversation of, hey boss, guess what we just did? Or oh, I've got to tell you about this. Or actually, I'm really excited, but there's one thing I need from you. That really transformed it. So again, I do think, we all think it's mainly about technology. Getting excited about the tech's important, but it really is the hardware. It's the hardware that's important.
That's well said. And in the clutter, we tend to look at one aspect of it, but your perspective is absolutely right. It does provide more time and takes away the routine and the mundane. So that's definitely good. But before we end, I'm very curious about your next book. What is it about, and when are we going to see it, and why is it compelling for people to read it?
Well, thank you for asking. Q1. So basically, I kept getting people calling me up and asking me very similar questions, which was, how did DBS go from being the worst bank in Singapore to the best bank in the world? What was the digital transformation journey, especially from leadership, culture, mindset, behavior perspective? All the stuff we've been talking about today. And especially the question was, we've trained the top 200. What do we do next? So I decided, okay, I'm going to write the book. Let's just write the book. So I'm interviewing, 20 transformation leaders from around the world, just identifying what works, breaking down the stages, and then making really simple playbooks. So wherever you are on the journey, here are some shortcuts, here are some tools of work, and here's how to avoid the dead ends. So just make it very simple. But the reason I called it Future Eager, and interestingly, MIT's just published a book called Future Ready, is I think Future Ready is too passive. Great, you're future ready, you're sat there waiting for the future to come to you, and when it comes, you'll be ready. And it almost applies a one-off thing. Oh, let's do digital transformation, then go back to life as normal. No, the world's not going to stop changing. So the idea of Future Eager is, how do you get leaders and ultimately the whole company just curious, just interested, just like yourself, obviously, just curious about what's coming next, and how do you get them engaging, playing, learning, talking, sharing, just a little more eager about what's coming, just leaning forward into the future rather than, oh my God, AI is going to take over the world and robots are going to destroy our jobs. I have a great slide I use from 1956, the Daily Mirror in the UK. Labour afraid automation going to destroy jobs. That was 1956. This is not new. Queen Elizabeth I refused a patent on a wool spinning machine. She was afraid to put, wool weavers out of work. None of this is new. So how do you get people just a little more curious and a little less afraid? So that's what the book's all about.
Laurence, it has been fascinating speaking with you. We are completely out of time. I'm very excited to read your next book, and I look forward to it.
Thank
and
you.
I ask all our viewers to connect with you on social media and follow the release of the book.
Fantastic.
All the best for the future. Good night, and thank you very much for doing the show.
My absolute pleasure. Take care. It's been